Tonight's talk has been organised with the Temporary Separatists, so Gibbs and Sofia Landström. We've had great conversations over the last few months. Thank you so much for your work. And I'm delighted to welcome our speakers. So we have Margaret Harrison, Angela Dimitrakaki, Johanna Gustavsson, and Catherine Elwes. Our chairs, Sophia and Rose, will introduce them further. We will have a chance for discussion. We're looking to hear from you lots during the panel, so please do raise your hand at that point after the presentations if you have questions. We have about an hour and a half, but thank you for being here. But please join me in welcoming our panel. Thank you.
Hi, thanks everyone for coming. It's really great that you all made it in spite of tube strikes. And thanks to the panel as well and the ICA for having us. It's really great to be here. So last year, I organised a conference about women-only shows, and which was great. And at the end of that, Sophia came up to me and said she'd like to organise something alongside me. And here it is. We've decided to think about the separatism, not of women-only shows, but the separatism of women artists if because we're interested in thinking about how collectives, where they're rooted in gender in this way and in place, and if by that they can offer some kind of resistance to the atomizing kind of individualism that's the heart of a lot of current global art production, and with the kind of art market kind of dominating a lot of the kind of art scene, if there are other ways of thinking about art's value and what those are. So we're interested in what these collectives offer art, where it has a value that's not about commodities and economics, but a value which is to community. There are two key questions here. First, why work collectively? And the second, why work in separatist, women-only spaces? We'd like to consider collectives who demonstrate a specifically feminist methodology to art practice, where working together in this way makes a space not to recreate or infiltrate patriarchal hierarchies, but instead present a radical shift in focus. We'd like to consider how collectivism destabilizes notions of authorship, suggesting that something that may be closer to the way that we live, an acknowledgement that we are shaped by those around us, that we do learn from others, and that while we may be different, there are many things that we share. Collectivism can be a way to rethink what artistic practice is and can be, a site for inclusiveness and social engagement, focused on process rather than product, which seeks positive change on a local level, where it is a value as a platform that helps to protect and connect and spread our communities.
Thank you, Rose. I don't know. Is this? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And further on in our discussions together, we found that we would like to consider the interesting problems of this strategy, where feminism is both a method to recognize gendered groups' treatment, but also attempting to find a route to autonomy and liberation against such categorization. These collectives are spaces where painful aspects of society are revealed to demonstrate the courage found in the strategy's contradictions, because it can on one hand be seen as very ghettoization towards women, but on the other hand it's needed over time in a contemporary context to change cultural ideologies. This strategy acknowledges that gender continues to affect our lives and shape both the economy and cultural spheres. This calls for feminist action that burrows beneath the surface and confronts the aspect of history that dominates the political vocabulary. This strategy realizes short-term projects for long-term interests. And throughout our research, we have found multiple really interesting collectives. All of them cannot be presented here today, but we have found both collectives that have worked in the past and in the present. We hope that this discussion will be an open discussion for everyone, even though the representation in the panel cannot raise voices for all. This is an ongoing project where we hope to host more of these talks and exhibitions and projects where we can try to include even more voices. So, to further on, we would also like to say that the artists here today are speaking on their personal perspectives on working collectively, not as spokesperson for the entire group. And we realize also that many of you in the audience probably have some kind of collective work experience, and we would gladly hear your voices. So throughout the panel discussion after our perfectly well-spoken panel have presented their points of view, and we have our open panel debate, we would like you to raise your hands if you have voice in anything, questions, statements that comes along with what they're talking about. And now I would like to introduce our panel here today. So we have Angela over here, who is a senior lecturer in contemporary art history and theory at the University of Edinburgh. She writes about feminism and capitalism and politics. We have Catherine over there, who's a video artist and writer who co-curated the feminist exhibitions Women's Images of Men and About Time in 1980s here at the ICA. These exhibitions came out of her involvement in various art collectives that she will talk about. Johanna over here is an artist based in Gothenburg, Sweden. She has worked in numerous collectives and focused on feminism, race, class, and she does that through various mediums, such as text, performance, and social interaction. Last here is Margaret. She's a radical artist who practiced expense over 50 years since the late 60s. She was one of the founders of the London's Women Liberation Group in the 1970s, and we would like you to start with your presentation. Oh, Angela will start with her presentation.
No, we wanted to.
Do you want me to do it?
No, it's fine. So Angela's going to give us how the evening is going to work is all the panelists are going to do a short presentation of their work, and then we're going to have a little conversation over here and open up to the floor. So definitely, as Sophia said, we definitely want to include as many voices from the audience as possible, because I know that there's probably lots of expertise out there. So over to you.
Well, first, thank you very much for coming here despite the sun. And of course, the tube strike. We like strikes, though. And of course, what a fantastic panel. It's a great pleasure, great honor to be here with at least, I think, three of the panelists that I have interviewed in the past, which is amazing. And I have written, for example, about MFK, where Johanna was involved. And I have written several things about collectives, but I'm not going to present what I have written here tonight. I'm going to be a little bit more provocative. And I've given a title to my short paper called "What is it that feminism is up against?" Any strategies and the tactics that underpin them must begin with attempting to answer this question that I just posed historically. This means that insofar as the issues of collectivism and separatism were raised in the 70s and certainly in the 80s, the answers given back then could not have been the last word on the matter. In 2015, the organizers of this event, which is called Women Working Collectively, What is Your Value?, set this framework to any possible answers, and I quote, "This discussion considers whether women artist collectives can provide a resistance to the atomizing individualism of neoliberal capitalism that is at the heart of current global art markets." You can read this online. Probably you read this and then booked. So this is a very important détournement. A gendered group, right, women artist collectives, are asked to resist a social and psychological condition, which is atomizing individualism, applying to all genders. I'm not going to say just both, but all. Indeed, a condition not understood as structuring patriarchy, but as a state in an economic system, neoliberal capitalism, currently defining global markets. In this economic system, well, here's a piece of information. The world's top dozen banks control $30 trillion in assets. This is the system's essence. The framework provided by the organizer suggests that we're witnessing a shift of consciousness within feminism in the arts and beyond, if we are to take into account Chandra Mohanty's argument from 2004, when she revised the essay, her very famous essay from the 80s, Under Western Eyes, which was a critique of white feminism, and advocated an alliance between feminist and progressive forces against global capitalism as the #1 enemy of women. In short, this shift of consciousness has been in progress for over 10 years. In these 10 years, women's position globally has continued to be a source of anxiety, not just for feminists, but even for the World Bank, that sees women explicitly as human capital, that's what they call them on their website, and they're very concerned about the loss of this capital. So in 2012, they provided the astonishing statistic, that's the World Bank, that women own just 1% of the global wealth, which other conservative forces have sought to challenge, raising the figure to 27%, which becomes plausible only if we think of the Queen of England and what she owns, otherwise it's not a good figure. I suspect that statistics concerning the distribution of wealth among women would be rather devastating. Violence against women has become a problem of incredible proportions, and during her 22nd of June lecture in Athens, Silvia Federici cited a French study that has established links between this violence against women and the fact that most new jobs for men are linked to security and require them to carry guns, which I thought was very interesting. And when the World Bank says that women's participation in the labor force has stagnated, they said around 55% globally, we only have 25% in the Middle East and North Africa, they mean production proper, and not the labor performed by women at home, for example, and paid as social reproduction. Do we need to add that the famous precarity, right, is a woman's burden with men, we read here, are nearly twice as likely as women to have full-time jobs. This is again from the World Bank. And South Asia, they're more than 3 times as likely, men to have actually full-time jobs. So we need to keep in mind this data when having this discussion, because whatever happens in the capitalist art world is part of a bigger picture of capitalism. This discussion is a call to reflect on, and I quote again, separatism in women's-only collectives, in terms of whether women's collectives make a space not to recreate, and that's an important phrase, or infiltrate patriarchal hierarchies, but the organizers, right, circumnavigate them. Now, to circumnavigate can mean, I looked it up in the dictionary, it can mean several things. Let's consider some of the synonyms. Bypass, go around, circumvent, skirt, travel around, compass. The latter one is most interesting, as it means another synonym, to shut in on all sides. But also, I read, to perceive and recognize the meaning of. You can find all this online. The question for me is then, which of all these meanings is attributed to the verb circumnavigate, and by extension to strategies, to strategic practices of separatism? Is the meaning that such separatist practices can offer an outside from which to grasp the big picture of capitalist patriarchy? Because if you remember, in some other theoretical strands, we have been told that no outside exists, right? Is the meaning that such practices can patrol the perimeter of capitalist patriarchy? And if you want to be truly optimistic, that such practices can shut in on all sides and put us immense pressure on capitalism and its uses of patriarchy. Now, to go with that kind of optimism, the one that says we're shutting in on you, capitalism, here is the first qualification that the separatist strategy would then require. Separatism would need to be practiced by so many women's collectives as to achieve such a shutting in, such an encompassing. Separatism could only work if practiced on a truly massive scale, if it became a movement. If separatism is to be a strategy of addressing power rather than a last resort withdrawal from whatever hurts us, the issue of a critical mass of separatisms must be given due consideration. It is a matter of numbers, of scale, of forces that can form a network of outsides, each delivering a distinct view of the inside, a network of such size that could be felt as a threat to the inside, if you will, an alternative counterculture. And importantly, separatism presupposes collectivism. You can't be an individual separatist, right? So quantity is very important in this discussion. To practice separatism successfully, you need a lot of people, women, to break from a structure. And even if individual artists, rather than collectives, would break, they would sooner or later be drawn into collectives, because no one can survive outside structures without relying on others. It's impossible. So I see separatism as a break from structures rather than from another gender, right? Because separatism used to have this perhaps other meaning. And if we're talking about capitalism rather than patriarchy, it is obvious why I define separatism this way. In this context, where people separate from structures, the value of women working collectively would be indeed huge. All women would engage in such a context would be socially, all that women would engage in such a context would be what we call socially necessary labor. In a different context, where collectivism is practiced within, extant within existent institutions, and separatism is infrequent and articulated in terms of gender, the value of women working collectively, the phrase used by the organizers, would not be high in my view. Because a collective can operate in the art market and other institutions exactly as an individual. A collective can have its works bought by museums and collectors, as indeed has been the case, can take up residences, can curate or participate in biennials, can receive fees, etc. What I'm trying to say is that, to conclude, is that there is no fundamental quality inherent in a collective that exempts it de facto from the processes of capitalist production. As many of you know, cooperation and collaboration have been pushed on research, including art, of course, from above in contemporary capitalism. I mean, we're all asked to work collectively. We can't really submit applications for funding where we work alone anymore. So, and the reason is working together. This working together enables faster innovation, of course. So capitalism is very interested in collectivism, frankly, and collaboration. So for a contemporary oppositional feminism, and anti-capitalist feminism, the value of women working collectively cannot be an imagined radical exceptionalism. Where they do so is what makes all the difference. Where women do so makes all the difference. To conclude, the radicalness of separatist collectivism would paradoxically be its normalization and frequency. But whether this is a realistic plan, we can discuss. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. We're going to go on to Margaret. I hope you all wrote down your questions for Angela for later, so you have that. Yes. And she's going to talk about her various collective works.
I'm going to see if this works first. Hello, everybody. I call this Now and Then. Is the old new or is the new old? And I'm the oldest amongst this group here. And you often hear of emerging artists. Well, I'm one of the re-emerging. In 2009, when the major feminist international group exhibition, WAC, Art and the Feminist Revolution, toured to Washington, D.C., one press report described me as the spirited Margaret Harrison. And I was especially pleased about this because as a few years prior to this, a colleague overheard a telephone conversation. It went like this: "Do you know where Margaret Harrison is?" And someone wants to contact her, and the reply came, "No, I think she's dead." Ever since, I've been introducing myself as Margaret Harrison, not dead yet. Now, jokes aside, some of my most closest friends have indeed now died, and too young and not recognized enough. But I take comfort that we pioneered and made a pathway for younger artists who, even if they don't know about us or even know who we are. After about 15 years of activism from the late 60s, there was indeed a major backlash, and younger artists became frightened of earning the disdain of their male professors and lecturers, from mostly their male they were mostly male, and retreated from taking collective actions. We'd been portrayed as ugly, wearing bib and braces, booted females who couldn't get husbands. Fortunately, some of us were able to move into education, and myself at various colleges, including St. Martin's, University of California, and my last post as professor at Manchester Metropolitan University. There is a saying, now I'm old, I'm ready for my youth. I agree, I could do much better now. There are many more jokes about aging by us aging people. I'm just going to tell you one more joke and then that's the end of it. A couple, both aged 96, went to see their lawyer, who were astonished when the husband said they'd come to arrange their divorce. And the lawyers asked, "But for God's sake, why now at your age? Can't you stick it out for a bit longer?" The reply from the spouse was, "Well, we didn't want to disappoint the children, so we waited until they were dead." Then that now is a possibility in a period of relative abundance. Some children have very poor nourishment. So why did collective action take place in that period? At the beginning of the 70s, the art market in the US and the USA collapsed. Not so much in the USA, I must say, but particularly in the US. Artists who had not been involved in other issues had been involved in other issues like rent strikes in Notting Hill Gate or issues of race discrimination and what we would call now marches for a living wage. And I wish I hadn't used that now since our Chancellor has now picked it up. We began looking at ourselves and discovered how poorly we were all doing after struggling through 7 years of art education, washing dishes at weekends and so on. The art schools in the 60s had become the focus of creativity. It was the entry point into higher education for many, just at the moment when those post-war babies had matured, having taken advantage of broadening education opportunities for working class men and women. We became aware of working class struggles and took note of how, by being in a union, they'd been strengthened. And industrial workers' positions were better by working through trade unions for conditions of pay. We became particularly aware of our own position as artists during the huge show Art Spectrum at Alexandra Palace. I organized the so-called film events of film and performance. And so by just talking to each other, we began to discover things. The upshot was my partner, Conrad Atkinson, myself, Sue Braden, and Sarah Kent, and I think Barry Barker, but I'm not too sure about that, formed a core group after a huge meeting here in this very space at the ICA, at which we were charged to explore some sort of grouping to agitate for better funding of artists and to work out payment strategies and broaden the notion of what an artist might do. We outlined what working groups would be useful and became aware that another small group had started to meet around the corner from us at Notting Hill Gate. The two groups came together at a huge meeting at the Janetta Cochrane Theatre. But prior to that public meeting, it was decided that there should be workshops to discuss issues from education to art galleries and representation and so on. Another group of women artists had heard of our efforts, and two of them came to see me, and I think it was Mary Kelly and Tina Keane. We sort of melded ourselves together and discussed strategy at Sue Braden's studio. The decision was made to place ourselves in central positions of the union so as not to be marginalized. So why did we think we needed a separate group within the Artists' Union? So within the newly formed collective, we had women from working class backgrounds and women from upper class and middle class backgrounds. And that was, I think that's the kind of thing that we we all still have to cope with, because Britain is a very class-based society. So we felt, why did we need it? We felt we needed to write ourselves back into history. We needed a focus on ourselves as artists instead of being stuffed into the general women's liberation movement. We needed a focus on the visual arts as distinct from performing arts, and as women, we did this. And we wanted to know what our issues were. We needed to articulate the rights of women artists and how they differed from male artists. To do this, we needed to place ourselves centrally within the union that we're trying to form to influence policies. We did this by nominating ourselves into positions within the union. For example, after Kay Hunt decided she didn't want to go on to be chair, we nominated Mary Kelly, and myself and Carol Kenner decided we would go for the General Secretary. What it was decided was that we would actually have a secretariat in the end. Actually, some of the guys didn't kind of get that. They still saw us as secretaries. For example, it was suggested that by one man that for major meetings that we prepare a text for them and they would read it out. We needed a separate women's workshop to talk about our art production, our own art production. We needed to find ways to get more women into major shows. We needed strategies to draw attention to these inequalities in the major institutions. We needed female volunteers to take part in any actions to do with education, mainly to make sure our issues weren't ignored as general issues. We needed to know how our issues related to other women's workplace problems. We needed to devise artworks which illuminated those issues. Perhaps I should show some of the slides as we go through. I'm not going to address the slides. They're just sort of generally in the sort of like, they're like wallpaper, really. We need to devise artworks which illuminated those issues. Myself, I was involved in a show called Women and Work and Homeworkers, and also a piece called Craftwork, which went up here in the ICA, and actually it became about prostitution. It's too long to explain that. We needed to find venues where women's work was seen as desirable and not turned down because of our gender. We needed a positive vision of our work and needed to get our own, get that over and not to give in to the cringe factor, and find ways to build confidence. We needed to believe in ourselves. Regarding education, we needed to campaign for more women lecturers in art colleges and universities, and we needed more knowledge of women artists historically. We needed to identify which men would support us for reviews and shows. We had to make allies. We needed to identify which unions might support our gender and needs. We needed to identify inequality of male to female artists in major shows. For example, the condition of sculpture in 1976 at the Hayward Gallery. And this was curated by Bill Tucker. There were 19 men to 1 woman. And later on, the 1977 Hayward Annual, 32 men, I think, to 1 woman. Catherine might be able to come up with that one. And by the way, after these protests, the Arts Council did ask 3 women to put on a show, and they kind of felt sorry for the men, so they asked a few men in as well. Some of us needed ways to contact women outside of the art world. We needed to develop and produce artworks with other groups, for example, the Greenham Women, trade union women, other campaigns to develop, and we needed an aesthetic to do this. We needed to find ways to affect government policies so they affected women artists. We needed to identify politicians to help us. Getting to the end of this. We needed to identify other groups working for women's rights. I decided to work with the English Collective of Prostitutes. That was for this show here. And finally, we needed to get on with each other rather than compete. Obviously, we were a little ambitious. And the issues were very wide-ranging. When the ICA put on the women's exhibitions in '79, we thought we'd cracked it. Incidentally, these shows did throw up the fissures in the debate in the women's art movement. And then came the backlash in the 80s, the changing of the guard with the YBAs and Charles Saatchi. We actually rudely called that group of artists, and I think it was not a good thing to say, but we did it. We called them Thatcher's children. The globalization of manufacture, the flexibility of globalized capitalism, new technology and whole populations moving from the third world to the first world, and religious fundamentalists coming back to bite us. Is the old new? Is the new old? The answer is, it is not the same as it was, but it still is the same. We still need a focus, but what is the focus and what are the strategies? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think we're now going to move over to Kate. Catherine, sorry.
Could I have the little tweeter? And do I point it at them? Yeah. Okay. Writing her book, The Second Sex, in 1952, Simone de Beauvoir declared that women were constitutionally unsuited to working collaboratively because, she said, they live dispersed among males, attached to certain men, fathers, and husbands more firmly than they are to other women. When I turned to my own experience of growing up in the 1950s, it seemed to me that I had always lived in communities of women, and that although conflict and competition certainly existed, cooperation was both fundamental to my condition as a girl and an essential part of my growing and learning. I was one of 3 sisters, as you can see up there. I went to an all-girls convent boarding school in Kent, where I lived for the best part of 6 years. And it wasn't until I went to art school in 1969 at the age of 16 that I began to enjoy, if that's the right word, the company of men, who was something of a mystery to me. And I was largely oblivious to the differences in status between men and women at that time, but it was my next move that awakened in me a feminist consciousness and a determination to join the women's movement and fight for the emancipation of my sex. I dropped out of college in a panic about my ability to earn a living and therefore to live independently. And I tried a number of jobs, including secretarial work, but then decided that I needed to get myself a proper trade. So I joined the all-women BBC makeup department, where I worked for 2 to 3 years before I went back to art school, armed with a marketable freelance qualification. The makeup artists, or powder puff girls at the BBC, were a group of highly skilled technicians, but in the now famously misogynistic era of the early 1970s at the corporation, we were treated like the knocking shop of the BBC, as our department was known. And the message was to make the artistes, the male actors, as happy as possible at whatever cost. And it's interesting to note that in 1955, women were barred from training as technical operators. However, in 1974, when I was working there, Barbara Frank, the first woman camera operator, was appointed at Television Centre, and I remember her being almost constantly taunted by her male colleagues. So my reaction to this was to sew feminist slogans into my work overalls. We had to wear these terrible pinafores, and I started reading de Beauvoir, Judy Chicago, Lucy Lippard, Linda Nochlin, Germaine Greer, among others, and I plotted my return to art school. Next. Whoops. Here we go. I restarted my art education at the Slade. Can you spot me up there? Where there were very few women teaching, and the history of art taught by Lawrence Gowing was to all intents and purposes the history of male art. It was as if women artists had never existed. And I also learned from the exhaustive research of Margaret Harrison that not only were women underrepresented in most walks of life, but there was also a significant gender imbalance in the galleries. And I do have all your figures, Margaret, if you want me to dig them out. So women's art remained not only hidden from history, but invisible to the contemporary art establishment. So I started to look outside the institution for an alternative art education and a new context in which to make my work. And answering an advertisement in Spare Rib, I joined the Women Artists Collective in the late 1970s. And this is us in 1979, and you've got left to right Sonia Knox, Jessica York, me, and then Rose Finkelsey. Now, at the time, the membership was very small, and Margaret, you'll have to tell me whether this was I think it was an offshoot of the Artists' Union. But we can discuss that in a minute. There were a few other members, including Tina Keane, Hannah O'Shea, and my collaborator, Annie Wright, who joined at the same time as I did. And the collective staged one of the first all-women shows in London entitled Hang Up, Put Down, Stand Up in 1974. And they also organized an all-day women artists conference in 1975. Now, the collective introduced me not only to the history of women's practice, but also to the feminist politics that underscored their own work. And up until then, I'd concentrated on painting and sculpture, and the collective showed me that women could explore their subjectivity and their politics in the newer cross-disciplinary areas that were opening up in performance, expanded cinema, installation, and video art. Tina Keane was very insistent that these newer forms were less overdetermined by centuries of male precedents, and if there was indeed a feminine sensibility, then it had a better chance of finding its voice in these younger avant-garde practices that were still in the process of evolution. Now, the Women's Artists Collective did not create exhibition opportunities for myself and Annie, so Annie went and joined the Spare Rib Collective, and I went and joined the Women's Arts Alliance. And the Alliance was in Regent's Park, and it housed the first, and as far as I know, the last women's gallery in London. And I'm not doing very well with this thing. Okay. Oops, sorry. Annie and I had, there's Annie and me at the opening, had a show at the Alliance in 1977, which we called New Ways of Seeing and Being Seen. And it included collaborative photographic works as well as individual pieces. There was also an open call exhibition called Sweet 16 and Never Been Shown at the Alliance, and also a number of solo shows by artists such as Jacqueline Moreau, Pat White-Reed, and Alexis Hunter. And it was from the Alliance that Nina Jennings launched her now famous demonstration outside this very building during the Alan Jones exhibition. So I've anticipated that one. And this is his chair from 1969, although I believe that this piece wasn't actually in the exhibition. Nina's challenge to Bill McAllister, the then director of the ICA, was on his poor record of showing women artists and his championship of what Nina regarded as a deeply misogynistic male artist. McAllister agreed to show some women artists if Nina could find any of sufficient quality and ambition. And this challenge she brought back to the Alliance, and a new group formed that was to become a Women's Images of Men Committee, and it consisted of Jacqueline Moreau, Pat White-Reed, mother of Rachel, Joyce Agee, and myself. To cut a very long story short, we devised a theme for the show based on a reversal of the usual axis of male artist and objectified female model, and looked for women who made work about men in painting, sculpture, drawing, printmaking, and photography. And as Lisa Tickner put it rather more elegantly, she said that women who could return the scrutiny and attempt, at least, to stay author of their own look and coolly appraise the male, not just in himself, but as bearer rather than maker of significance. Now, we spent 2 years collecting material, visiting studios, which were often also the artists' kitchens, and after a few false starts and a change of regime at the ICA, we were successful in securing the venue. By this time, Sandy Nairn, who you see at the top of the picture there, was director of exhibitions, and the art historian Lisa Tickner had joined us, and together we selected the show from several hundred submissions. And this is a picture of Pat Whiteread on the left and Jackie Moreau in the middle talking to a journalist at the opening of Images of Men. Now, it became clear that the theme of the exhibition excluded whole swathes of feminist practices. So 2 other shows were devised: Issue, Social Strategies by Women Artists, curated by Lucy Lippard, and Margaret was in that show. And About Time, an exhibition that I curated with the performance and video artist Rose Garrard. Okay. And there we are. There's Rose on the left. We're setting up About Time. And our brief was to select the work of 21 women artists working in film, installation, performance, and video. And we chose works that, and I quote, demonstrate the artist's awareness of a woman's particular experience within patriarchy. And here is if I can get it to change, a list of all of About Time. So the upshot was that the ICA staged an unprecedented series of exhibitions dedicated to women's art, accompanied by conferences, screenings, workshops, and ancillary events. The ICA shows sparked a number of other exhibitions across London, including a show of abstract painting at the Acme Gallery, curated by Claire Smith, and a Salon des Refusés in an independent gallery in South London. So by a process of osmosis, an unplanned festival of women's art took place in London in 1980. Now I'm going to just run through the slides from now on without really saying what they are. They were hugely successful, especially the Women's Images of Men show, which broke all attendance records at the ICA, averaging 1,000 visitors a day. Now, in terms of working collectively, there are 1 or 2 observations that I would like to end with. There was indeed a clash, or rather a productive tension, between the collective endeavors of feminists and those who wished to make their mark in an art world that was based on rigid hierarchies, on individualist notions of male creativity, what Linda Nockman called the golden nugget of genius, underwritten by a capitalist art market. We also had another problem, which was maintaining the collective nature of the Images of Men committee. The ICA, quite rightly, I suppose, wanted a spokeswoman for the show, a pressure that we resisted. And as a result, other women have periodically been credited for what we did, largely anonymously. I recently heard Ivona Blaswick, who was Sandy's assistant at the time, speaking on Radio 4, and she could only remember the name of Lucy Lippard out of all the women who were involved in organising these shows. On the other hand, Rachel Whiteread publicly pays tribute to her mother and the Images of Men committee, who met in Pat's North London basement for over 2 years. Now, a positive and perhaps obvious point to make is that as a collective, we were stronger than we were individually. This is something to do with the fact that most of us were middle class and English. And we had been conditioned to accommodate the needs of men who were expected to succeed in the world of work where we were not. Now, this led to a tendency towards shyness and self-effacement and an inability to assert our individual rights. However, perhaps because of our natural nurturing tendencies, we found that we could be extremely brave when protecting and promoting one another's interests. In spite of the factionalism that existed in the early 70s and 80s based around different interpretations of feminism, the women's shows across London in the 1980 demonstrated the extent to which women could and did collaborate to produce one of the most powerful statements of female creativity within second wave feminism. And I do have a little postscript, which is the negative part, I guess. Johanna, you'll be glad to hear. In 1980, when asked why, out of 670 applicants for individual grants, not one woman was shortlisted, a male panel member at the Arts Council was reported to have said, "Because women do not have the depth to be artists." And the curators of the 1981 New Spirit of Painting, so that's 1 year after the women's shows here, exhibition at the Royal Academy, they selected 38 men and no women at all. I'm just going to do what Hannah O'Shea does. This is Jackie Moreau. Oh gosh, Jenny Whitman. I'm sorry, but I'm up. I don't know, I'm a little bit lost, so I'm just going to go. Here we go. I can pick it up from here. That's my own work, Each Fine Strand. Rose Garrard, Beyond Still Life, Surveillance. Roberta Graham, Short Cuts to Sharp Looks. Susan Hiller, 10 Months. Hannah O'Shea, Litany for Women Artists, which is what I'm doing now. Tina Keane, Seesaw, Can There Be a Dialogue? Sonia Knox, Spring. Sylvia Ziranek, Rubber Glover Armour Drama. Bobby Baker, My Cooking Competes. And Rose from Kelsey, Mind the Gap.
Thank you so much. Then we have our last speaker, Johanna.
Yes, as Sofia said, I've been in numerous collaborations, and I feel like I've often failed them and my collaborators. But I've continued because I believe it politically, even though it's very difficult. I'll say something short about two of the different collaborations, one that I'm in now and then one that I've been in before, in relation to collaborating and separatism. And the first I would like to say something about is was called Malmö Free University for Women, MFK in short, which I initiated together with another artist, Lisa Nyberg. And we ran the university between 2006 and 2011, when it transformed into another collaboration between the two of us called Radical Pedagogy, which we recently ended. But MFK was a storefront space in Malmö. In the space and around the space, we arranged over 100 different activities over the years with more than 100 different people in our community. So all of the activities we did was in relation or in collaboration with people around us, the feminist community. We used different types of separatism, mainly gender separatism, and we first defined it that our activities were open to all women. And very soon the queer community contacted us and said, but what do you mean by women? And so then we changed it to open to all who identify as women, and then later changed it to open to all who now or at some point have identified as women. The first 2 years we survived on a grant that we got only because we had a former professor in the jury of the to select us, a feminist professor who did us a favor, and we got the money to last 2 years. After that we didn't get any funding because of because our work was separatist, and we didn't want to compromise on that. So then we started to teach instead to raise money, and then so pedagogy got more and more of an interest of ours, and so that's why we started to develop or dig deeper into radical pedagogy after this work. But I want to say something about the year that we started. 2006 was an election year in Sweden when we lost to and got the right-wing government. This was also a year when we got our first feminist political party called Feminist Initiative. And this, sounds like great news, but the thing was with this feminist party that they didn't want to say that they were left or right. So this was used against them. The left ridiculed them and said that a vote on the feminist initiative would be a vote on the right, which to a certain degree was also true. But there were a lot of conflicts within the community. And I was part of an activist group who worked very hard up until this election. And there were a lot of splits in our community, and mostly between race issues and class issues. And when we lost the election, that's when we decided to start a space like MFK became even more important. Maybe it was a withdrawal, but we saw it as, we have to establish a space where we can be the ones who define our everyday, because since the right wing was taking over. And it was also important to claim a space of our own and try to bridge the gaps within our own movements. It was very urgent at that time. And maybe we were naive, but Lisa and I thought that maybe art could be some sort of neutral space where this could happen. And in some way it was actually. But it also became very difficult since art is very bourgeois. The second collaboration I want to mention is an ongoing collaboration that I'm in called FAGS, which stands for Feminist Art Gallery Solidarity. We are a little sister to FAG, Feminist Art Gallery in Toronto, Canada. We don't really have a biological relation, but we liked their name and asked if we could use it. I run FAGS together with my colleague and artist, Sapphire Vurba, since 2012. And for us, FAGS is a strategy to survive. We initiated FAGS to avoid, resist, turn away from cultural policies as dictated by the right-wing patriarchy, to avoid white cubes, white rooms, and white men. We initiated FAGS because we need air. And FAGS is a feminist separatist space, space by and for feminists. We claim all forms and aspects of art. We interpret the gallery format in multiple ways. FAGS is also alcohol and drug-free. I'm going to read our definition of feminism. Hopefully you will agree, but I like to read it out loud because I like to hear these words out loud in a space like this. Feminism is to resist patriarchy, heterosexism, and binary gender norms. Feminism is to resist capitalism and racism. Feminism is to understand that there are power structures, locally and globally, and that they intersect. Feminism is to see one's own position within these structures, that we're part of this world, our bodies throw shadows, that we both gain and lose space and privileges. Feminism is to understand one's blind spots and to realize that it's impossible to see everything from a singular position. Feminism is to show solidarity with others and to do things together. Feminism is to reject privileges that prevent equality. So we chose to have FAGS, Feminist Separatists, and that means that visitors, artists, and organizers agree with FAG's definition of feminism. And it's because we like our work and discussions to begin on a level where the importance of feminism is already established. We take the time we need for what is important. We think critically, challenge each other, and develop feminism through our practice. In our working process, we choose the feminist alternative without compromise. FAGs have no money at all. So since we started 2012, we've done one exhibition. We raised money to do that show by doing study circles at the Workers' Educational Association in Stockholm. And so we raised change money. But we collaborated with several really great artists, 5 individual artists and 4 groups. So it was a big effort from everybody. But it was really, and I'm a bit sad and defeated right now because we have been working on our, up into our next exhibition with a new local group in Gothenburg. And a couple of weeks ago, because all of us have no money and very little time, this pushed us into too many conflicts, and we have decided not to do this collaboration because it will be too hard on us. And even though we understand it's because of capitalism and neoliberalism, it's still too difficult for us to go through with it. So right now I'm defeated. But I was happy to be invited to come here. It brings me comfort to be in this panel and to be in a room full of people who are interested in and probably have a lot of experience and good experience in working in collaborations too. So I think a lot about failure, like I said in the beginning, because I feel like I failed in many collaborations. But I continue because I believe it's politically. Problems are numerous. Lack of housing, privatization, the sold-out welfare state, institutional racism, class-based humiliation, heteronormativity, decades of individualism, competition and egoism supported by the state, combined with a systematic repression of unions and the criminalization of difference. I told the panel that my speak would end on a very pessimistic note, and they agreed to let me go last anyway, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think what we'd like to do now is, if it's okay, you look like you want to say something.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, go on.
I want to say that those of you who have not read, you published a manual. I can't remember exactly the name, but anyway, can you remind me? Right. It was it is the most extraordinary record. Yes, you can also download it from the website. But I had a book that actually a male Swedish artist gave me, your thing, long before I met you. And it's absolutely extraordinary. At least it has inspired in me, I hope, a very kind of useful approach to your work. I found the questions that you posed there. I could have been writing forever, and hopefully I will, just on the issues you raised. And we'll fail later and better, okay? So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. So this is a manual that MFK kind of produced at the end of your collaboration.
Yeah, when we decided we were going to close MFK, we wanted somehow to pass on the knowledge and the experience that we had gained. And we didn't want it also to be something sentimental, that this was and now it's no more. So we decided to write it as a manual. So it's our experiences, both good and bad, and disagreements and We have like only 20 copies left. I brought 4. But like you said, it's also, you can download it as a PDF online. It's called Do the Right Thing, a manual by MFK.
So what we would like to do now, we have some questions, but we would like to open up for the floor first. So anyone can ask a question about the presentation you just heard.
And it needn't only be a question, actually. It can also be a statement to a point, not just questions. I'm kind of keen to hear from the audience.
Hello, I'm Felicity Allen. It'd be lovely if people could say their names when they speak, I think, so that we know each other. I'm really pleased to be here tonight, and I just wanted to say how much I appreciated, particularly your presentation with its despair, self-criticism, admission of failure, because one of the things that I'm very conscious of, having been around in the 70s, is the way in which there were so many failures between ourselves as well as from the organisations that we were struggling with. So I just really wanted that kind of idea of self-reflexivity to kind of come into the conversation. It would be great. Thank you. Because that was something that I think we learned through consciousness raising.
Can I say that I don't entirely share the sense of the 1980 shows being a failure? Because I wasn't talking about the show. Yeah, but I don't even feel that era was a failure, because we had daughters, or some of us had daughters, and the fact that Rachel Whiteread took something from her mother.
No, I'm not talking about, I'm not saying we failed. I'm saying amongst ourselves, there were always failures and exclusions and so on. And I think it's important to recognise that.
But my fear is that it's very easy to talk about the conflicts and about the failures and really overlook some of the triumphs and the achievements and the kinds of connections that were made that I think lasted a lifetime and that were then passed down perhaps by I know that the 90s happened and appeared to have buried feminism, but it was still moving and going, and to me it's wonderful to hear what Johanna is saying of the initiatives that she's been a part of. And I'm not suggesting that I'm directly responsible for what Johanna has done, but I think that collectively that the 70s had an awful lot to do with giving women courage to take it forward. Am I wrong about that? Margaret?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking through a thing that I wrote up 1977, which reflected on the 7 years previously. And I kept coming across this phrase, and the show didn't happen because of lack of funding. And I thought, oh God, this is getting depressing. But on the other hand, what we did, I mean, we were exhausted by it, I have to say. But what we did actually did pave the way, even though we were presented with a huge backlash in the 80s. I think we set up the signposts for the future, and younger artists have been picking up on that, and it's kind of important that you look at those signposts in order to know where you're going. So I think it's very important that you mention the things that didn't work, because then you can find out where you may go, in the immediate future.
Anyone else on the floor who wants to say something? No, not right now.
I think that, I find the discussion rather fascinating, but I think the way, Johanna, you did failure, you practically meant about ending, like that this, you see, I have to use the word project, and that would have been my point, that we know very well that for, at this moment in capitalism, we have something called a project, and everything sooner or later turns into a project. And I remember that you were discussing actually in the manual this thing, if I'm not mistaken, and how you wanted this to have duration and not be a short-term project. So, which precisely has to do with the structures that you know, as organizers actually mention. Like, what happens to the collective within the temporalities that become available from contemporary capitalism? And obviously, what I'd like to know is that if in the 70s, which I think that the way I've read this history, that there was a greater alliance, perhaps with the workers' movement. I have this feeling that in the earlier 70s, Margaret, with your work with Kay Hunt and Mary Kelly, for example, there was definitely something there, if perhaps things were different. But I think that the artwork as such is something that took us to the definition of the project, because it always has a specific duration. And it's a very complex thing, theoretical, that we'll have to analyze more in the future.
Yeah, Margaret, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the project that you did with Mary Kelly and Kay Hunt with the box factory in Bermondsey.
Yeah, the Women in Work, you're talking about Women in Work, yeah. Women in Work came about actually as I came out of my partner's show here called Strike, and it was a women's strike it was shown at the ICA. And Mary had become involved in the night cleaners campaign, and I just had a show that had folded because the police closed it down, basically. And that first image I showed you was from that show, and the second image also was from that show. But what they objected to was the images of men, which I'd altered. But anyway, I decided that I would not carry on with that kind of work for a while, but that I would actually try and find out more about the world. And my partner was a working class man, and that the strike was in his own village, and he thought that was the end of it. He wasn't going to do any more. He couldn't stand the art world. But anyway, he carried on. So Mary and I got together and said, you know, really we should do something together sometime. And it became Women in Work when Kay, who lived in the south of London, and all her family had worked in the metal box industry. And she said, oh, I want to do something about my background. So we kind of came together. And God, it took us ages to do this thing, but it took about 4 years, I think, when we finally got it on. And I had to work in the north, and you know, Mary had she had her first, well, the only child. And so we were kind of not always together. And I think that's the thing, that you don't have to be sort of like, you know, glued together. You have to find ways of working so that you each have an input of some kind. The other thing I would like to say is that there are other ways of working collectively which are outside of the art world. It doesn't always have to be the art world. And I decided to work with the Home Workers campaign and with a woman from the trade union movement. And by doing that, I found a way into the powers of government, because she was able to get her connections to raise it in Parliament. And as it happened, these home workers have been doing government work for tuppence, halfpenny. And we actually got that rate of pay change. But that's kind of an accident. But what I'm saying is there's different ways of working, and we can't always all agree. You have to find your way through that.
Thank you. And coming from that, when you're saying how to change kind of a system by working collectively and in collaboration, I would like to go on to you, Catherine, and because you were part of a lot of institutional set exhibitions here at the ICA in 1980, etc. And I would like to ask you if these exhibitions that were set in institutions, how much were they about resisting and how much were they about challenging or changing them from the inside? Did you see any change from the political aspect?
I think that one of the objectives of the Women's Images of Men project in particular, rather than the other two issues or about time, was to do something about the isolation of individual practitioners. And that's one of the things that we discovered when we were traveling around visiting people, is that they felt completely cut off from one another. And that in order to, perhaps we weren't quite imaginative enough, but it seemed to us that using a venue such as this one, and on a scale that we were planning, that would be the best way to bring together, the best way to enable women to make contact with each other, with one another, through the exhibition. And also we were planning to show a lot of work. And in order to do that, we'd have to have a big space that was accessible, that had some status. So we were, in a sense, already compromised, I suppose, by our ambition not to become, and I don't think any of us thought we were going to become great artists and recognized and make a lot of money. We just wanted to talk to each other. That's, I think, the initial impetus. But one of the things I was going to say was that in terms of capitalism, there was the reason that a lot of women were working in performance and working in video was that we were producing ephemeral works that couldn't be collected, and that the value couldn't be augmented through the marketplace, so that we were trying to avoid the marketplace by making unmarketable work and working collectively. And somebody was, I was talking to Madeleine Hoykes today, and she worked collaboratively with Elsa Stanfield, and Rose and Tina worked together. There were lots of duos, there were lots of women who were pairing up. And she said that the art world resisted the idea of two people working together. They would always come up with one fee, or they would say, what do you do, and what is your responsibility within this project? So that two people working together were already setting up a kind of tension, or were opposing the system, or opposing the art world to some extent.
Johanna, I was wondering if you could tell us about because you've kind of been invited to kind of work in kind of big institutional spaces with MFK, is that, and I'm not sure that you always took those opportunities.
I mean, MFK was never really accepted in the art world, so we had one exhibition in a like white cube space institution. So that was really, we didn't have the opportunity to say no so many times, but when we did, when we were invited, it was important that it was relevant for us, that we could make use of the space and the money that we got out of it. So we would do it on our terms.
I just want to say one thing about the white space. There was a saying in the 60s, out of the galleries into the streets. And we thought, well, some of us thought, let's bring the streets into the galleries. Yeah. They need to know about us. So that's one of the reasons for having these shows at the ICA.
Oh, hi. My name's Ellie Roberts. Thanks for your presentations. There's a new exhibition that opened a few days ago called Liberties. It's in a solicitor's office in West London somewhere. I can't remember where exactly. I went there the other day, though. And loads of the women that were in the 1980 shows are in that show. It's an all-women show. And Margaret Harrison, actually, yeah, you've got a wonderful piece there. But I just wanted to kind of ask if any of you had any reflections on the changing spaces in which we see those works, because it seems like at a time, say, in the late 1960s or 1970s, where women were not seen in those kinds of commercial galleries, or maybe even didn't want to be seen in those kinds of galleries. And I'm not criticising women for being part of that show at all, but I'm just wondering on what the kind of complicated networks of play going on there between being in those spaces, not being in those spaces, because it kind of elicits a lot of really complex feelings for me. Like, I really enjoyed seeing the works, but I also felt kind of a bit angry at the same time about the opening party and stuff like that. And yeah, but anyway, that's another story. But any reflections on those changing spaces in relation to commercial galleries?
Yeah, I kind of want to ask you a question. Sorry. Yeah, Ellie, you said yes. Do you see a difference between, it's not a rhetorical question, do you see a difference between a commercial gallery and the Tate, the BP rooms? Because it's an art museum, and I agree that you've raised the problem, but one is supposed to be a museum dealing with history, and the other directly commercial. So do you see a difference between these two things?
I think it's really kind of interesting thinking about what is public and what is private, but I guess that was kind of the question that I'm putting to the panelists. I don't really know.
But what do you think? I seriously want to know whether you would, for example, if you would be an artist or even a curator, whether you would prefer, whether you would see a difference in having your work in a British Petroleum. I mean, there's so many scandals connected with this corporation, and a commercial gallery.
I think that there's separate issues, actually, but I think it's really important that women are represented in our public arts institutions, definitely, and also that people are visible and acknowledged in history. But I also think it's kind of interesting in terms of thinking about what our aims are. Are our aims to be selling and to be in the commercial art gallery? And I'm not saying they're not. It's a question. Yeah.
Margaret, maybe you should answer this.
I just want to say one thing. One thing that motivates everybody, including artists, is to pick up the food and put it in there. So we need to be able to afford to eat. We need to be able to afford to support our families just like everybody else. And that's one of the reasons that we formed what we thought was a trade union. It wasn't exactly a trade union, we knew it was only going to be short-lived. But what we needed to understand was, how do artists earn a living, in particular women artists? So I would say, actually use whatever space you can get and use it on the understanding that you know what that space is about, so that you can actually find a way through all of that stuff and produce the work, and to also make communication with other people. For instance, I show with a commercial gallery in Berlin, and that brought in a whole lot of women into the gallery who I would never have met, who also bought my work. I was just astonished. So I think you cannot be totally purist. There is nowhere to hide in capitalist society. You have to find your way through it while keeping your own ideologies.
I think one of the problems with the way that 70s feminism is being repackaged for the marketplace is that perhaps in its presentation, and I've seen a few shows in the last few years, is that the politics gets a little bit lost. But sometimes the artifacts are exquisite. I was thinking Rose English's wonderful hoops, and I can't remember the name of the piece. And some of Rose Kelsey's images are absolutely stunning, but somehow without the political context in which they were originally seen, that some of the, I think, politics has really been lost. Now, what's interesting to me now is hearing Ellie and Amy Tobin is here and listening to what you've been saying, is that it's possible that a new wave of feminism is going to somehow rather reinvest this work with a different kind. I mean, it won't be the same meaning, but with a new meaning. And that's something that I'm looking forward to seeing. And in a sense, waiting for that to happen.
We had a question over there.
Hi. A lot of talk seems to be about lack of money and coming back to the barriers about not wanting to take money from certain places and how to earn money to support your art. And coming here from Canada, I've really found it to be quite challenging not having an alternative gallery space where you can be paid to show your work. Like, I can see how there's a problem where you're either, at least in my experience of being in the UK, it seems very based around private sales or not earning money from your work. And I was wondering, with the Paying Artist campaign, if there are some feminist collectives working with, is it Artist Information or I don't know which group is actually mainly working on the Paying Artist campaign, but I feel like as a female artist, it was hugely possible to enter the art world without connections by having applications for exhibitions where you're paid to exhibit. And I wonder if that's ever existed in the UK, and if there are groups who are working towards that, if that makes sense.
I mean, if I can go back a little tiny bit into history, one of the things that GLA would pay you £60 for a performance, and we were cultural workers and being paid by the hour for our labour was one of the outcomes. But the other thing was that London Video Arts and the Film Co-op rented your work, not for huge sums of money, but enough sometimes to make a difference. So there were structures in place for you to be remunerated for what you did. And it was also possible to apply individually, as somebody mentioned, that you can't now apply as an individual anymore, but you could at the time apply to the Arts Council for support for particular projects that you wanted to do. That has gone, I believe. It's true, that has gone. So I don't know. I'd like to know what the contemporary situation is.
Actually, there was some success in this direction. And we did form an alliance with the Canadian artists, particularly Carol Condé. And we got together from time to time across the waters. But I think the Canadian artists were much more successful in achieving that. But but certain parts of the country did take it up, particularly in the northeast. That was one of the first things that they adopted quite some time ago.
Hi, my name's Eliza Gluckman. I'm sitting next to Lucy Day, and we curated the show Liberties, which is at Collier Bristow Gallery in Holborn. It's a law firm, and it's a complicated space layered with many problems, both physically and mentally. And we've been doing it for the last 8 years, and we are leaving, and our parting shot is Liberties, because we had an Arts Council grant. I've been looking at a project called A Woman's Place, and we were looking at women in art practice and historical site. And we thought the last thing we'd do at Collier Bristow was take the site as a place of law, and therefore reflect on 40 years since the Sex Discrimination Act. And it is very complicated, and I'd love to have a drink with Ellie afterwards and have a chat through. The other thing is that Lucy does a lot of work with AN and AIR. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, just responding about the Paying Artists campaign is that that's actually come out of AIR, which was a membership collective that has come out of AN, the Arts Information Company. To my knowledge, there isn't any separate women or separatist groups that have come out of Paying Artists campaign. It's still very young. It's still finding its feet. It is campaigning very actively. It needs more support from artists. And it, like all collectives, it will grow, it will develop, it will morph, it will change. It will probably fail in areas. It will grow again into different directions, like many of these things do. Thanks, Alba. I also just wanted to say that Day and Gluckman, two women, are a collective. We're a very small collective, but we are a collective, and we embrace all sorts of different practices, and we have been particularly focused on Liberties and A Woman's Place for the last, certainly Liberties for the last few months, and A Woman's Place for the last couple of years. But I'm actually delighted to say that as a collective, we also did get some funding from the Arts Council and are planning to get some more. Liberties is set in a law firm, and as Eliza said, it comes with lots of complexities, but we kind of figured that in a fairly patriarchal society, it was quite a good place to put a big show, well, actually quite a small show, but quite an important show, that looks at women's artist practice from over the last 40 years. And so it does have artists from the 80s, it has artists from the 90s, it has artists from the 70s showing works that they did last year. So it's a broad range. It's not a survey show, but we hope that it actually is a provocative show. It's an interesting show. So I just wanted to leave it at that, really.
Cool. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Because in fact, the issue with a fee, a collective, anyway, something more than an individual. I've heard even from BHV, in Zagreb, that, for example, when they get the curatorial fee, it's actually split among them. And what was the case with the Arts Council? Did you get, as two people,
No, we
Right.
pitched it slightly differently as we pitch all of our projects, and it has come up in terms of fees, that people assume that because there's two of us, we expect double the fee. We don't. We're a partnership. We split everything down the middle. And we actually formed as a partnership partly because we both have children. And it was a way of actually realising our ambitions and being able to be parents and make all of that work as well. And we actually now, we don't even live, somebody was talking earlier about being joined at the hip. And actually, thanks to Skype when it works, Dropbox, etc., I can now live in one part of the country and Eliza can live in London and we make it work. Sorry, go back to your other question. Fees. Yeah, no,
Yes.
It's come up a lot that people assume that we're going to expect both. When it came to the Arts Council, no, we just said, this is how much we would like from you for the project, and that's what Diane Gluckman received.
Right, but in your conscience, as it were, you consider the fact that you're two people.
Yeah, I
So
think
the fee that you asked
fundamentally
for-
we get underpaid because of that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to ask,
Yeah.
because I don't know whether perhaps
do.
it works differently. From all the collectives I've interviewed, it's the same, that they get less.
Yeah, you get less.
Because
definitely.
we live in a society where we're organized, kind of like...
Artists are underpaid anyway.
Sorry?
Artists are underpaid anyway.
Yes, they are, but it might have worked differently, in a
Yeah.
collective having more power to say, okay, we're like 3 people, therefore we're going to be paid.
Is
Like
the
this.
option of teaching completely out of the question now? I mean, do you not consider that? Because when we came out of art school, there was part-time teaching, and that you could combine that with your practice. But is it just now impossible to get anything like that?
Well, we need to wrap up pretty soon.
I just quickly can answer you that I'm artist and I teach at university, but as a sessional. And actually what I'm experiencing, I'm looking for a new job. What I'm experiencing that because it's too relevant in a way, because actually I teach photography. So I can say mostly on the photography there is more and more women now coming to do degree in photography. We have already not 50-50, even like 70-30, I would say. And what I found as soon as the women graduate, they found actually teaching one as the main priorities, main the options, how they can earn money. But in UK, with whole increasing fees and losing the number of the students, I would say education is slightly in that sort of crisis, so there is no big demand in a teacher as such. So a lot of young artists, yes, they consider that, but it's very tough to get a job there. It's not that easy as it was, as I know from my colleagues in the 70s and 80s.
No, it wasn't. Wasn't easy.
We need to wrap up, and I would like to ask Johanna a last question. Since you're in collaborations right now, what do you see the functions of them today as a way to make art that might stand outside of a capitalist or a commercial value, but still need funding from such?
I don't think you can be outside of capitalism, but find ways to work around it. And I think usually I blame feminism, but I think it's actually the art. It's art that's it's art that's criminal, not feminism. It's art that's the problem, not feminism. To me. Well, it's. I just find that it's usually used against us as a weapon too. Maybe, perhaps, if we use that language. But
I sense you'll be writing another great book soon. Yes, I do want to ask if anyone here who is part of a collective, actually is hired by an art school as a collective. Because I think we have a lot of mechanisms, that return us to individualism. And if there is an if something else is going on, you are hired as a collective to.
on freelance basis, I've been teaching.
Yeah, but
that's what you mean?
Together with Lisa as a collective.
Yeah, and
Okay.
also
Do you get
Sapphire
paid?
that I that I work with now.
Do you get paid as a collective? Again, I'm really interested.
Yeah,
in
but
this.
it's
Is there a way to-
always a negotiation because they start by wanting to pay one person. And then, yeah, it's a negotiation. Then you work less hours.
So it's like volunteering.
It's
So you get paid less.
usually, yes.
Sorry, I sound like a lawyer trying to do something. That's not my.
No, but I agree. Yes.
There's a question just over here.
Okay, this will have to be our last question, unfortunately.
How are we doing for time, actually? Just 10 past 8. Oh, okay. Well, okay, that's good. So those people with your hands up, ask questions in a second.
Yeah, I realise it's a bit of a big question right at the end, but my name's Andy. I'm a director of an organisation called the Consortia of Therapeutic Communities, where art practice is often used for people to explore their experience of being in community, which I suppose has parallels to collective production that you were describing. But the question is really about, it seems quite pivotal really, the relationship between the collective creation of artwork and how that relates to the collective creation of a fairer society. And it's something around how when people come together and create something which is communal, that they're actually creating a model for a fairer society, and how that experience can be expressed through the work.
That's yeah. Has anyone got responses to that?
It's a big question. As I said before, there are different ways of collective working. Sometimes you're working for one goal, and then you hope you're going to come out the other end achieving something. But it's not just collectively working to produce art, but it's also working collectively with other people outside of the art world, if you like. So, for in my spaces, I worked with, let me see, what was the last one I worked with was the Afghan Women's Society in San Francisco. Or, something else. It's different. And I think I found it almost easier to work with collectives of women outside of my practice because we didn't argue about the practice. They wanted me to do something and they didn't interfere with how I wanted to produce it. So that was my way of sort of working through that.
Can I just say one? I suppose I just probably adopted a slightly different strategy over the years, and that was to create situations or exhibitions here and in Canada and elsewhere that enable the maximum number of people to show their work and for that work to be validated. It seems to me that there is nothing wrong with somebody wanting to make an artwork of whatever kind it might be. And I think that the difficulty is when one artwork becomes the iconic artwork that speaks for every other artwork and therefore crushes every other work. That's the problem. But when you set up a big noise with lots of different voices speaking, not quite all at once, but at least in the same space, that you set up really dialogues between works, that for me is important because I think that women should make art.
No, I agree. Yeah, I wasn't speaking against that. What I'm saying is there are different kinds of collective work. And there was an urgency, and there still is an urgency for women artists to get themselves together to make the work possible and to actually expose it to a number of people. Of course, those of us who did that in the 70s and 80s became exhausted, and we're so pleased that people like Eliza and so on are now picking up on that and doing it.
I think I saw some more questions just around this. I don't know if there's... Yeah, okay.
Hello, my name is Alma. It's not really a question. I just wanted to share our experience. We have an artist collective which we started in 1996 called Foreign Investment. And how we survive is that we all work as individual artists as well. And yes, we do always get paid less. Basically, we get paid the same fee as it were one artist, although most of the time we are 4 or more. So that's sort of today.
I had a question for you. What does your so you work individually as artists, and what does the collective do for you? How do you
Well,
in what ways do you enjoy it, and what ways do you kind of benefit from it, and why are you part of it? Why did you decide to work collectively?
Well, it all started. I don't really want to say why or how it started, but basically the benefit for me is that I'm a painter with my individual practice, but with the artist collective, we do things which I wouldn't necessarily perhaps dare to do by myself. Several creative energies come together, which I find are, how can I say, have in a way more impact. But I wanted to say to this other lady about failure. We fail all the time, which we see as a success in terms of the art world, which is now totally run like any other corporations. And I feel at the moment art is running, or artist or the art itself is running against walls. And there are not enough people who dare to do something about it. I feel at the moment very positive that, especially since the last election, that there is a women's party now, and I just feel good. It made me feel happy for a whole day.
Happy for a whole day. And were there some other questions? I think I saw some more. I don't want to leave. Oh, yeah, okay, cool.
Hello, thank you. I'm one of the generation of artists who's been basically a younger generation that's been mentioned, and I think I can't speak for the whole generation, but I'm very grateful for what has happened in the 70s and 80s. And I was just sort of wondering, and this is not an accusation, but more of a question that I have to myself, why this collectivity that we're discussing today, and the collectivity that I see in the panel and also in the audience, is so white? And whatever happened to any kind of idea of Black feminism, and why I go to so many feminist events and it's so, I'm saying the word now, segregated, which I think it just is. And if there's any comments on that, or anything that you feel, any names that should be mentioned that haven't been here, or why there aren't any Black women invited on the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. No, this is definitely, I mean, I think Sofia mentioned this at the beginning. Today's discussion is part of a larger kind of project looking at women artist collectives, and of course what's represented here is only a certain perspective and is limited, and we kind of fully acknowledge that. Yeah, but there's more to come, but I agree.
Within FAGS, that's been a theme. I mean, when we wanted to start a gallery and define feminism, it was also to question like we said, the white rooms and the white bodies and the white discussions. So that's something that we have in our first exhibition tried to work against, both within our working group but also as a theme in our show. And the money that we raised to do the show was the study groups on white norms, both in society at large but also specifically within the art world. Because to us that seems like the most urgent question to ask. So I'm grateful for you to addressing it here also.
You know, I think one of the most interesting things that has happened over the last few years, all around the world mostly, there have been a series of women's exhibitions. And one of the last ones I went to, I think, was in the Netherlands. And there were artists from Iran, there were artists from Egypt, there were artists from Africa, and they were all younger women. So we began to think, oh, why is it all these younger women? And they had come through, I think, because the opportunity was there for them at last to produce work. And what was really interesting was, to be introduced to these young women who said, oh, I know your work. And you think, oh my God, they know my work. How did they do it? And it somehow got through the network. The other show that I was in was the Istanbul Biennale. And again, that was the same situation, which was a truly international show, but it included a lot of women of different colors, different nationalities, and so on. And that broadened the whole approach out. It also meant that we were looking at globalization as it was happening, because it was being told by those women artists. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Zulika. I'm part of a collective as well, which has, at one point, 9 people, 8 women, 1 man. And this is something that I've also wondered about, predominantly white audiences in feminist discussions. And I think that there's an issue of privilege, particularly, in art schools. Majority of people are either middle class or white and middle class. And there's a lot of issues. I mean, even in our class, the numbers of people who are either white or middle class, or just white in general, in London, which is one of the most multicultural cities in the world, was, there was a contrast between the amount of people that were of other races and their interest in feminism, and then how many of them were female as well. And I think that that's something that needs to be talked about more, is the issue of privilege and feminism and how those two intersect.
First of all, I would invite, I think these are important questions, but don't just look this way, look back and see, the audience, like you people, but I think also I find it a little bit problematic right now to just be talking in terms of color, if we actually mean, the actual color. Because we live in such a divided, if we're talking about capitalism, because this was really the framework given by the organizers, if we're talking in these terms, I think that I feel very black being Greek. If you're talking about loss of privilege, there is a war in my country right now, okay? So I'm coming from Athens today, so I can tell you that what you call white can actually acquire a lot of meanings depending, on what capitalism is doing. So I'd really like to problematize this notion of skin color very much. It's not the only division.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's all we've got time for. Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you very much to the panelists. And also I'd really like to thank everyone at the ICA, Rosalie, and Sophia and I have been speaking to lots of different people, including Althea Greenan, Kathy Nairn, Felicity Allen. I've spoken to various people over email as well who've been really helpful in kind of like piecing together kind of collective work and the ways in which it's worked and the ways in which what it's done. And I realise that we're not representing everybody here, including those people who were involved in various collectives over the years. And so I just want to make sure that we're acknowledging that. But thank you to them, and thank you to you guys as well.
Thank you to you.